Hi, everyone. My name is Leslie Anderson. I'm the project director for this training that we're conducting on school boards and educational equity, bridging research, policy, and practice. We're very excited to bring this training to you via webinar. For those of you who may not know, we have done 2 of these trainings in person, one outside of Milwaukee and the other in Madison. And we were very excited that we got a great response to the training. People seem to find it very helpful, and we're hopeful that what we're able to share with you today, you'll also find helpful. I just wanted to start by giving you just a brief overview of the plan for the next hour and a half. We'll do a quick welcome and introductions. I'll introduce the members of the team who will be presenting this afternoon. Then we'll talk a little bit about the achievement and opportunity gaps in Wisconsin, some strategies that the state of Wisconsin as well as some school districts have used to improve outcomes and close gaps. And then more specifically, what school board members can do to reduce the gaps in achievement and opportunity. So just to give you a little lay of the land, who we are, the presenters this afternoon include myself, Dan Elajam, Janine Hildreth, and Alicia Butler. We are all experienced researchers and technical assistance providers, and we're again very happy to be presenting this information to you this afternoon. One thing I did want to point out is we've built a number of activities into this webinar that we're hoping will help everyone engage a little more directly in the material that we're presenting. Just to give you a little sense of what we'll be doing, there will be a somewhat brief chat room discussion. There will be some large group discussions, a few polls that we'll administer, and then a short it's sort of a survey at the end. Anyway, so there's lots of opportunities for you to engage with the material, as I said, and also we're hoping that the interactive nature of this webinar will we're hopeful you'll find helpful and interesting. So just a little information about REL Midwest. We really wanted to give you a little bit of the context for how we developed this webinar. The project is part of the Regional Educational Laboratory, or REL Midwest. And it's through applied research, technical assistance, and engagement activities that we aim to support our partners in understanding research and evidence in order to solve problems of practice. The Midwest Achievement Gap Research Alliance, or MAGRA, is a collaborative partnership between REL Midwest, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and regional and local education agencies. The MAGRA partnership works with partners across Wisconsin to use research and evidence as they improve educational outcomes among Black students. This webinar, as well as the in-person trainings we hosted on the same topic, originated from our partners. The MAGRA members advised on this project throughout, including an in-person convening to review and advise on the content of this session. So just REL Midwest, so you know, in case you don't, is one of 10 RELs across the country, and they are funded by the Institute of Education Sciences, or IES, at the U.S. Department of Education. So what are the goals of the training? First and foremost is to raise awareness about opportunity and achievement gaps experienced by Wisconsin's Black students. And we have some data to share with you about some of those gaps to facilitate conversations among peers. So as I mentioned earlier, we will be having group discussions, and we're hopeful that everyone will be interested in sharing their ideas, their concerns, what they believe is happening in their own districts. The more that people are comfortable sharing, the better these discussions will be. The third goal of the training is to share resources and strategies that school board members and district administrators can hopefully use to increase educational opportunities and improve outcomes for students in their district.
Hi, Leslie. I'm so sorry to jump in. This is Cora, but we're still seeing just the title slide, so I don't know if you're able to move forward to the goals slide or the other introductory slides.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can check on that. I'm going to try sharing my screen again. Can you see it now?
Yep, I see the REL map slide now.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm sorry. For those of you who are on the call, you didn't miss much. They're just very simple slides. These are the presenters. So I'm very sorry for that. Moving along to the goals of the training, as I mentioned, to raise awareness, facilitate conversations, and share resources. Just to give you a little background, there is a growing body of research that has examined the role of school boards and their influence on the quality of education. And that there are some studies that have shown that there's an association between what school boards do and the academic outcomes that schools enjoy. And then in Wisconsin in particular, the role of school boards is important. In 2011, Act 10 shifted more responsibility regarding decisions and policies aimed at impacting student learning to school boards. So we just wanted to share with you a few quotes. This is from Campbell and Fuller, who published a book not very long ago, just actually came out a few months ago, called The Governance Core: School Boards, Superintendents, and Schools Working Together. And in that, they say the value of the board is in the strategic oversight and support that the board provides. The board brings the passion, the drive, the commitment to achieve the moral imperative, not distracted by the day-to-day administrative challenges. This is purposeful action. So we're assuming that there's an interest in participating in this webinar because there's recognition that the board can set the vision for a school district. And the more the board understands about some of the gaps in achievement and opportunity, the more informed that vision can be. Before we go much further, we thought it might be helpful to everyone involved if we had a little bit of a discussion about who everyone is, who's participating in this webinar. So if you could use the chat box to just tell us a little bit about your role in your district, the size of your district if you know it, but most importantly, if you could just share why you chose to attend the training and what you're hoping to get out of the training. And once I see folks entering information in the chat box, I'll read some of that to you. Okay. Any volunteers? Oh, there we go. Okay. Let's see. We have a principal from a small district. There's just one high school, 2 middle schools, and 4 elementary schools. We have a first-year board member in a relatively small district, just 2,000 students. Another school board member in a K-8 district. Another one in a 7,000 student district. Anyone want to describe why you wanted to attend the training, or perhaps more importantly, what you're hoping to get out of the training? I see one is interested in learning more about the Board of Education's role in equity. One district has about 35% minority students and 20% poverty rate. So here's one that hoping to inspire all students and staff. Another, someone else said equity is important to me in our board. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. Use the chat box if there's more that you'd like to share. Also, at the end of the webinar, you'll see our email addresses. Please, by all means, if there's any additional information you'd like to share with us, please do so using our email addresses or getting it, yeah. So, okay, moving along. The next section of this webinar is focusing on achievement and opportunity gaps in Wisconsin. And just so you know, I'm going to share a few of the slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Alicia Butler, and she'll take you through more of the data. This is a quote from Carter and Wellner, who wrote a book in 2013 about closing the opportunity gap. In a pluralistic and democratic society, schools must respond to students' actual needs, build on their unique strengths, be culturally responsive, and provide the opportunities necessary to give every student a fair chance at academic success. So we wanted to try and describe in some more clear terms what opportunity gaps are and what they look like. And this is just a graphic representation of what opportunity gaps look like across schools. So within the same district, you could have two schools that are providing very different access to opportunities. In the schoolhouse on the left, you see that students have access to a positive school climate, AP classes, wraparound support for families, high quality pre-K, small class size, whereas, and that those opportunities cumulatively amount to a broader set of skills and abilities for students and better readiness for college and career. And then on the right side, you have a school that's able to provide some opportunities, but not nearly as many. And then another quote from Carter and Wellner is just focusing on the differences in schools. And students of different social groups may attend good schools together, but the segregation within that school that often occurs belies claims of equal opportunity. In many schools, African American, Latino, and Native American students are rarely exposed to the upper echelon college preparatory classes. And this is really just another graphic representation of some of what Carter and Wellner were saying. So even within a school, you can have very different access to opportunities for students. So some students, again, within the same school have better opportunities to access AP classes and small class sizes, whereas other students do not, and it results in very different degrees of readiness for college and career. And then the last graphic on the opportunity gap is something that I'm sure many of you have seen, that equality is really about providing all students with the same supports and services, whereas equity is providing students with the supports and services that meet their needs. And then liberation, sometimes this side of the graphic is referred to as justice. But liberation is basically, it's taking away all the barriers, all the policies and practices that stand in the way of students achieving what they, achieving their best in school. With that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Alicia Butler, and she's going to take you through some of the state level data.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. So as Leslie mentioned, I will walk you through some state level, and then we'll do an exercise with district level data to give you a sense of the types of opportunity and achievement gaps that you might see in the state of Wisconsin and in smaller districts between Black and white students. And so if we look at the next slide, this graphic is showing the gaps between Black students and other students on the English language arts test that's administered by the state of Wisconsin. And as you can see here, Black students have the largest gap between their proportion of students who score proficient on that exam or advanced compared to white students, and smaller gaps for American Indian, Hispanic, Pacific Islander, and Asian students. If we keep going to the next slides, and the next one, we're looking here at graduation data and college enrollment. And we see similar trends where Black students, again, have some of the largest gaps in the state between between the proportion of students who graduate high school compared to white students. And so in the next slide, you can actually see the data. In Wisconsin, the proportion of students who graduate Black students is 67% compared to 93% of white students. And the gap in Wisconsin is one of the largest, and you see the national gap is only 9 percentage points. And on the next slide, we look at post-secondary enrollment. And these data are for the class of 2018. Looking at all post-secondary enrollment, 41% of Black students enroll in either a 2- or 4-year college compared to 64% of white students. And we see gaps in also the types of institutions that students enroll in. So Black students, 45% enroll in 2-year institutions compared to 29% of white students. And Black students, 54% of them enroll in 4-year institutions compared to 71%. So again, we see these consistent gaps between Black and white students. Heading to the next slide. This is just a quote that again drives the point home that Wisconsin has some of the widest gaps in achievement. This is about high school graduation rate for 2015 when it was 88%. It was the 6th highest graduation rate nationally, but the state had the widest gap for Black and white students. So on the next slide, we'll look at other types of opportunity gaps in the state. So this is looking at the advanced placement enrollment in the state. And you can see that Black students are 9% of the students who are enrolled in schools in the state of Wisconsin, but they're only 5% of the students who enroll in advanced placements courses. So they are underrepresented in AP courses relative to their population. And I'll note that these data come from the United States Department Office of Education's Office of Civil Rights. And so the data are a little bit outdated, but we continue to see these gaps elsewhere. So the next slide. Here we're looking at Black students' exposure to exclusionary disciplines. So the proportion of students who are suspended or expelled. So again, Black students are 9% of the population in the state of Wisconsin, but they are 38% of all students who receive an out-of-school suspension, and 29% of all of the students who are expelled. So these students are being overrepresented and punished and excluded from school. Let's head to the next slide. And so we have a poll. We just want to know, to what extent are you familiar with these data on opportunities and outcomes for Black students in Wisconsin? Until you'll see the questions, if you could just hit your response and click submit. We'll have Cora share the responses. Okay, so a mixed group, 27% were very familiar, 55% were mostly familiar with the data, and 18% were somewhat familiar. So there's some familiarity, but it ranges. So with that in mind, let's go to the next slide and we'll take a look at district level data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a website. This is ProPublica's Miseducation series. If you're not familiar with ProPublica, they are an independent news organization that does deep investigative reporting. And they did a series that looked at opportunity across the United States and in various districts. So I'm going to show you what these data look like for the Appleton Area School District. Okay, and so what you should see, this is the ProPublica's website and the Miseducation series showing you Appleton School District. You see the district composition. You see there are 5% of students who are Black, 9% Hispanic, 72% white. And then we see issues related to opportunity, discipline, and achievement gaps. So in the school district, white students are 2.4 times more likely than Black students to be enrolled in AP courses. And Native American and Alaska Native students are actually 6.8 times more likely to be suspended as white students. So you see different groups. We can see opportunity. So this is the AP course composition, similar to what we showed at the state level. Black students are 5% of the population in the district, yet only 2% of the students who are enrolled in AP classes and 2% in gifted and talented. So what we would like you to do is look at your own district's data. So going to the ProPublica series, I'll include the link in the chat box in just a second and show you a data tool that you can use to sort of capture some of the issues related to opportunity and achievement gaps in your district. So coming up is the ProPublica link. And then the next link will be the link to the data tool that you can download if you'd like to record information about your district. And so in the meantime, let's go back to the slides. I will stop sharing my screen. We also wanted to point you to the other data sources, which include the Office of Civil Rights data. You can see the link there. And also WiseDash, which includes some of the state and district level data in a nice data tool. Okay. Yes. So is anyone having trouble finding their districts? You can enter your response in the chat box. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And we have a second poll now asking how familiar you are with the district data that you see on ProPublica. Okay, so here it looks like most people are very familiar, so 38%. We have some people who were mostly familiar and 25% who were somewhat familiar, and we had some folks who weren't familiar at all with their data. So I think that segues nice into our discussion. So go to the next. Oh, does anyone want to share anything that surprised them when looking at their data? Any volunteers? Yeah. Yeah, so I think this is great that people are familiar. So we can move on to the next section to think about some strategies that districts have used to address these gaps. So I'm going to hand it over to Janine.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. So just a few things here in this next couple of slides, just to show some of the work that is already going on in Wisconsin. So we can go to the next slide. First thing I want to kind of talk about REL West has, as we mentioned, as Leslie mentioned in the opening, they've been working on this with the MAGA groups. One of the first things that they did was a systematic literature review of the interventions associated with Black students' educational outcomes using the ESSA tiers of evidence. The review was published back in February of 2018, and this review, as well as other sources, are available online and free to use. And the staff from REL West will be sending all the links to, as a follow-on to this webinar. And to support engagement with the findings, we also created, they also created an infographic that outlines the review process, as well as the interventions highlighted in the report, and which students' outcomes they were associated with. So we do have some data here and some research backing up what we're saying. So we've got the picture of the cover, and then again, what the review process was.
And Janine, I just wanted to share that there are links to the lit review and the infographic that are in the chat box now.
Okay. Oh, excellent. Thank you. Okay, next slide. And then they also did, the people at AAR did a short 11-minute video based on the district's work and the district work in Racine to address some of these gaps. And it kind of brings to life some of the work that some of your fellow districts are doing to address these achievement gaps. Next slide. And then finally, we have here, and to accompany the video, they created a viewing guide that provides additional information and discussion questions that you can use within your district to facilitate conversations addressing equity issues in your district. So again, we'll get the links, and they're also at the end, as Leslie said, we have a references section at the end of this PowerPoint too, which you'll also get. Okay, next slide. And so here we'll just kind of delve into, including Racine, we'll delve into a couple of specific strategies that are going on at the state and district levels already, with the hope that if you see something that's exciting or interesting to you, that maybe you can reach out to someone in one of your sister districts to discuss what they're doing. So next slide. All right, so at the state level, as I'm sure many of you know, that there is a lot of work going on with Dr. Evers that has identified the achievement gap as a statewide priority. First, specific efforts include the state's Promoting Excellence for All initiative, which they also created a report. And then as part of its ESSA plan that went to the federal government back in 2016, they pledged to cut the achievement gap in half for all student groups in 6 years, so another 3 years or so. And then there is the District of Innovation program to encourage innovation equity initiatives statewide by helping remove policies and administrative barriers which may inadvertently be causing equity challenges within districts. Next slide. One of the first ones, we mentioned that they had done the video on Racine. And so what Racine has done is they support a broad range of programs designed to connect young people with mentors, support early learning, childhood education, and promote positive school cultures. And so all this work is codified in their core values as represented in their strategic plan and other governing documents. Another district who's been doing a lot of work on this in this area is the Green Bay Area School District. One of the things that they have done that's really important is they've appointed an equity coordinator, somebody who's responsible for working across the district to implement this work. And they've also hired a bilingual family engagement coordinator to help ensure that all students have access to quality educational experiences. As some people said in the early chat introducing themselves, they mentioned that they want to ensure the success of all students, and these are just efforts that some of your districts have made to make the work accessible to everyone. Next slide. And then one of the things we did when we were developing this, we did a little bit more work. We did an interview with staff from Janesville to get a little bit of extra information on that they're doing. And so they've been working on this for a long time, starting about 10 years ago. They on this work with really being spearheaded by one of their former staff members. And they were also involved in working, helping the state. They were part of the districts that helped the state develop the framework, the Excellence for All framework that we discussed on the previous slide. And they adopted the Developing Excellence for All, which was based on their work with the state 5 years ago as a district priority. And as we see at the bottom, can you go back one, Leslie, real quick? And they have the 5 promises there representing their work. So they have student success, relationships, culture and climate, finance, and health and safety. And so they've really been working to make a coherent district plan to allow all 5 of those to work together to help increase equity opportunities throughout the district. Next slide. And again, as we had mentioned in Green Bay, they've also appointed a district staff member to lead the work in the equity work in the district. They've integrated equity issues throughout all of their district work as represented by the 5 commitments. And right now they're in the process of refreshing their curriculum. So they're adopting new curriculum materials and resources. And so as they're going through this, using the equity lens when adopting, making sure that all students have access to those materials and that the materials that are adopted that reflect this. And as they were planning these new curriculum materials, they learned and speaking with staff from the schools that at one point in high schools, only students who enrolled in AP classes got to take their textbooks home. So that was a policy or from the district or a strategy from the district that was actually causing gaps. And so as they're purchasing new curriculum materials, they're making sure they have enough materials for all students to take their books home to study in the after school hours. Next slide. And so what they've done is to filter this down to the school level. They're supporting and encouraging all schools to identify equity, to do an equity audit to identify gaps. And they're encouraging all teams to create an equity team of diverse staff. And this team takes the lead work at looking at the data, providing trainings on implicit and explicit bias, microaggressions, teaching other staff how to analyze the data, kind of learn about that, and then using all that information to develop the school's equity plan, which will guide their work moving forward. Next slide. And then one of the other things, Milwaukee Public Schools has also done quite a bit of work in this area. And so what they've done is, as we have listed here, is they have a Department of Black and Latino Male Initiative, which kind of tries to address the problem from two ends. Both, having, creating positive narratives about what Black and Latino males are capable of doing from the teacher and the administrator adult end, but also from the student and the young person end. So that they can all see that these students have assets, they can bring brilliance, creativity, and greatness to their work in the school district. And so then you see the BLMA vision is that Black Latino boys and young men will possess an affirmed sense of identity, dignity, and self-confidence, and will have the necessary tools to triumphantly navigate college, career, and life. Next slide. And so now try to make use of the group chat again. No, we're going to actually take off the let people speak, not the chat. So if there's anyone online who wants to kind of briefly discuss things that you've done, that you've got going on in your district right now to kind of address some of these issues, the equity issues locally that you're aware of. I think we're unmuting everyone, so if people want to weigh in. And I think everyone should be unmuted. So if you're, go ahead and please share if you have something. Oh, somebody doesn't have a microphone, unfortunately. Okay, give everybody a couple more minutes.
If you're uncomfortable using your microphone, by all means, use the chat box if you have anything you wanted to share.
Hey, this is Sean from Wauwatosa. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yep.
One of the things that we launched last year was related to that high standards for everybody idea, where we're offering AP Human Geography to all sophomores. It's a mandatory course that all sophomores in our high schools are going through, and had our first kind of pilot year to see how that went relative to the other history course that was offered. And so far in the first year, everybody, there were pretty similar results from one year to the other, which means there were students in a more rigorous course and exposure to that AP rigor, and didn't see much slip. So that was a good tactical success, I guess, for us.
That's great. Yeah. Opening up AP is, I think, one of the people different districts are leveraging that as an opportunity to, like you said, increase rigor, access to rigorous opportunities for all kids, while providing the supports they need to be successful in those courses. We see here, I have one, Kathleen. She says they've implemented a family game nights, which include dinner, and encourages families who might avoid coming to the school because of experience to just come in and ask to have fun. And so that's another way, again, to make level of comfort in the school more available to everyone, and kind of encourage family engagement and support. So that's another great strategy. All right, well, I think if that's it, we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the next section.
Okay, great. Thanks, Janine. So we've looked at statewide data, and you've had an opportunity to dive into your district data to understand some aspects of the achievement opportunity gaps facing school boards. Now that we've talked about state strategies, let's dig into what school board members can do to address these issues. And so to do this, we're going to build on the work of Pat Savage-Williams, and the reference to this work is in so the references at the end of this PowerPoint that you'll have. And Savage-Williams identified 10 ways for school boards to champion equity. The next slide, Leslie, please. In the next two slides, we'll take a closer look at the bolded strategies. That's not to say that the other three we're not talking about are not important. They absolutely are, so please take a look at them after the webinar. The article is short, and you can find it on the web pretty readily. So the first strategy, have a strong commitment to racial equity. School board members must commit, as we've been discussing, to creating school cultures that embrace equity and support the superintendent in moving equity forward. Just on the long lines we were just talking about with making AP Human Geography available to ninth graders, some schools have also detracked ninth grade classes to increase as a way to increase participation later on in AP classes, so that they're detracked in ninth grade. You don't have students in, for example, history and English and biology classes tracked by ability, which then sets them up in 10th grade. Some kids, predominantly the white students, to be prepared to take AP classes, whereas students of color are not prepared. So that's one important strategy that can come out of having this strong commitment at the board level. Another thing that boards can do is to adopt an equity statement. And an equity statement isn't policy, but it's a guidepost. Back to the quote that Leslie read earlier on about school board members having the moral vision for the work. An equity statement frames and focuses a school district on equity. And so the Wisconsin area of school boards, Leslie, next slide, please. Couple next slides. One after that, I believe. There we go. Adopted an equity statement last year, just about a year ago, saying that we, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, affirm that students can, will, and shall learn. Not all students receive equitable opportunities, and this is the key part of the definition, I think. Equity is the intentional allocation of resources, instruction, and opportunities. And I really can't emphasize that enough. It's the intentional allocation of resources. It's not just sort of feel-good statement of we want all students to learn, or we want to focus on students who have been disadvantaged or have been left out or otherwise, or have that fence up blocking them, but we really want to intentionally allocate resources, instruction, and opportunities. In addition, at the board level, it can go down to the school level. This is an example of, the next slide is an example of a high school equity statement. I'll let you take a look at that on your own after the webinar. It's really quite detailed. It's this slide and the next slide. Again, so the point is that equity statements are important guideposts at the district level and then going down to the school level as well.
And so the next thing we recommend is having a chance to expand your personal knowledge and understanding of race issues. One recommendation, of course, is to look for courses or workshops in educational institutions, preferably about unconscious bias, and develop the tools and language to have these conversations about race. We all know that talking about race and resource allocation can be difficult, but if you have an opportunity to build the skills to do so, we think that you'll be able and more comfortable in having those conversations about resource allocation. You know, when we talk about unconscious bias, it's things that seep in and we often don't know that we're doing them. And those things are real and we have to address them. And so, you know, having some opportunities around to get training around that can be really helpful. We also recommend that people develop the capacity to challenge insensitive policies that might impede the success of students of color. We heard some examples of, you know, a policy that, you know, maybe sounds innocuous on the surface, like not allowing students to bring books home, but does really impede. So just really be thinking about how you can challenge those policies in your district. On the next slide. The next thing is initiating and creating structures that, structural changes to support equity. And you had some data tools earlier, there are many more out there, but this is an opportunity to look at your data and look at the disparities that might exist in your district and think about the structures that hold them together. We want you to think beyond the idea that traditions and customs are driving change, but that there are structural things that get in the way of students' achievement. And you might not see them as problematic, but you know, we do think that they are important to address. And then think about the relationship that you have with your superintendent and other administrators in your district to create counter narratives with different outcomes about what students of color and other groups can achieve.
Okay, so to create those structural changes, the next strategy is to change school budgets to prevent disparities. So that involves being certain that all funding, staffing, materials, equipment, facilities, space, school trips, and other resources are set using an equity-based lens. So as Alicia just said, you're looking at those relatively innocuous seeming things like who can take textbooks home, to say, well, what does this mean for equity? Highly qualified staff and facilities are also a place to focus, including learning environments, technology, instructional support. You know, they all need to be allocated, dispersed, maintained with an eye towards equity. The next one, be data informed. We spent a lot of time today, this afternoon, talking about data. It's critically important to remember that the patterns established have been in place for decades, if not longer. It's unlikely that those disparities will disappear within a few years, but you need to continually examine your data to understand those patterns and disparities and to understand how they're changing or not changing over time in response to the changes that you put in place to address these equity concerns. And lastly, expect opposition. Change is hard, we all know it. And all of you who are board members know it as well as anyone that you're going to face opposition no matter what you do. And addressing these issues of equity and achievement gaps can and often do divide communities, but it's critical to continue engaging with community members and with different stakeholder groups, particularly those who are most vocal and who may honestly never have had any personal experience with equity training or thought very much about it, but react kind of viscerally. So we encourage you to employ careful and thoughtful responses and strategies to opposition that you will likely face. You'll listen to the concerns and provide opportunities for others to share their perspectives and to listen to their perspectives. You won't convince all of your opponents, but the research literature on civic engagement shows that you will convince a few, and those who may never agree with you may at least not oppose you quite so actively. And they do generally have a need to feel heard. So engage them and try your best. So next we have another poll. Which strategy do you feel reflects a current asset or strength of your school board? folks need a little more time to respond, or do we have many responses yet? Okay, so let's see, the areas of strength. So personal knowledge of race issues, developing goals and policies with an equity lens, knowing district demographics, those are all sort of the most commonly cited strengths. Having strong equity commitment, being data informed. Not surprisingly, not many folks mention changing school budgets to prevent disparities. That's a really tough one. I'm not surprised that that's an area that not many people listed as a strength yet. So this is really helpful. We have another poll, which is which strategy do you feel is a current area of growth or need for your school board? So it's the same set of strategies, but now to where do you think you really want to work next? Which of these do you think is an area where you could spend some time productively? All right, so here, a little more unanimity. Initiate and create structural changes to support equity. Is a place that almost half of the respondents thought was an area for growth, which is great. I mean, it's a great place to focus. And thank you all for sharing that. All right, so I want to open it up for a little bit of discussion. Corey, I don't know if we can put those results back up. Maybe we can't. Oh, perfect. So what do you notice about the responses in terms of strategies that were identified as growth, as areas of asset and growth? I think we had area of growth is initiating creating structural changes to support equity. Maybe just starting with that one. How easy or difficult would it be to implement that? That's something that folks who selected that think that you're ready to address. Feel free to either type and we can read them, or unmute. You should be unmuted, or you should at least be able to unmute yourself if you want to just go ahead and share verbally. Are there things missing from this list when I started down the road of, well, Alicia and I started down the road of, here's some strategies for school board members. Were there things that you expected to hear that aren't listed?
I think the main thing is trying to figure out which structural changes we should initiate that are that will move the needle. There's a lot of work that people do every day. So I don't know that there's necessarily a hesitancy to do things. It's more just a want to really focus on the things that will make an impact. And to me, it's difficult to figure out what those things are.
Right.
So do any of these things resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of them, and I think there's a willingness in our school district to try all sorts of things. The difficulty has been in measurement and in understanding what's really helping. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Is that a better use of our time than this other thing that we might want to try? People just have limited amount of time and resources, so we could throw everything at the wall and try everything, but then everybody would be exhausted. So to me, it would be better to have almost like a Hattie's, right, list that says, if you do these things, this moves the needle this much.
Yeah.
But I don't know that exists.
And do you have a sense of how much the needle would need to move in order for the district to feel comfortable that it's moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, we have some data that we're tracking that's crosstabs based on race and gender and poverty and all those things, and tracking that year over year, and have goals for each year for where it should be to get to closer to equity and to have 80% achievement across the district and things like that. But we can track all the numbers and we can do all sorts of things. It just feels like I don't know all the drivers will lead to the outcomes that we want.
Right.
All right, it'd be easy if we could just say, well, we flip this switch, and then spend that money, and then it's all set.
Right.
There just seems like a lot of guesswork.
Well, that's one of the advantages to being on this webinar is hopefully some folks who are on this call can share some strategies that they've pursued that seem to be bearing some fruit. I'm wondering if anyone has any examples they could share.
We do have a couple of responses in the chat box of work that's been going on. We say that, let's see, Jennifer, yeah, as Dan said, that she's in a small district and structural changes are down the road. They have to get that baseline understanding of race and race issues within the district. So getting that foundation before you can move ahead is probably a challenge there.
And it's definitely critical.
Then also Kathleen mentioned again that they are looking at data there and doing interview processes to see what else they could do to help increase equity. So Kathleen, if you can kind of chat, I think Dan asked too, what are you interviewing? Is it like the hiring interview process, or are you interviewing different people across your district, stakeholders to understand what some of the challenges may be? So she says, yes, it's with their stakeholders, especially their Black and Albanian communities. to really kind of get a sense of what some of the challenges and experiences, I'm assuming, of those community members are in the district. So thank you, Kathleen.
That's an important step. Others have reactions, responses, strategies they've used that they'd like to share. We'll be talking more in a little bit. All right, Alicia, should we
go on?
Move on?
Yeah.
Thank you all.
And so now that you've been on this webinar, we want you to be thinking about the next steps for your school board. You know, what is it that you can do both in the immediate and long term to help close some of the opportunity and achievement gaps that exist in your district? So in the chat box, I've included a link to these questions. And what we would like you to do is have you respond there, and when you're done, click submit, and then I will pull all of the responses together and we'll have a little bit of a discussion. But the questions are, what do you think that your board could do in the next week to improve educational outcomes among Black students and close opportunity and achievement gaps? And then what can you do in 6 weeks, 6 months, and in a year? And in your view, who needs to be involved to make improvements? So we'll take about 4 to 5 minutes to respond, and then I will pull everything together.
I'm going to go ahead and move the slides back to the list of strategies just to help refresh everyone's memory what those are. And obviously, you don't have to select any of these strategies, but to the extent that they resonate with you, please do.
We have a very immediate action tonight. Sean is hosting a board development meeting tonight on equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Yes, another example is we heard from during the training, the in-person training, some folks were planning to use the PowerPoint presentation that we had given to present to their board the following week. And these slides will be made available to you.
So let me take 1 more minute to respond, and then we can move on to our discussion.
Are people able to access the survey, the Qualtrics survey? Any trouble with that? All right, so let's, while folks still continue to add to the survey, you should feel free to do so. Let's have another discussion before we move on to the results from the survey. 2 questions. Which actions do you think your board might implement and why? And who needs to be involved in efforts to improve outcomes and close gaps in the district? And maybe let's start with the second question. Who needs to be involved? It's something we haven't talked a lot about this afternoon. But for your particular districts, your individual districts, who else do you need to involve? To what extent are your other board members where you are? Do you need to do work with the rest of your board or your superintendent? Are there particular stakeholder groups that you know you need to reach out to? Okay, board and administration. The board is very in sync. That's great. Not that that makes it easy, but the opposite makes it almost impossible. Again, feel free to unmute yourself. You should be unmuted, but you may have to unmute your phone or on the or in Zoom as well. Other responses? Here, we've developed an equity plan with specific goals. We need to begin taking deeper action on them, especially on equity-based budgeting and being more aggressive in hiring diverse staff. Additionally, investing in more diverse curriculum and instruction vehicles. It's great. Yeah, but I know that it's hard when you're typing, but if you can say a bit more about how you developed your equity plan and arrived at your specific goals, I think that might be a challenge for some folks who may feel the need to do this, but getting started is often the hardest part, and thinking about, well, what are we going to put into our plan, and what specific goals can we put in, at least initially, that are specific, measurable, achievable, etc. For others who have done that, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dan, that for those that have developed an equity plan, it would even be helpful to know how long that took. We know from Janesville that they've been working on this for 10 years. Not that it took them 10 years to develop an equity plan, but to give folks a sense of the amount of time it takes and what the level of commitment might be. It could help set expectations appropriately. I also wanted to take the group back to some of the slides we shared earlier about the opportunity gap, and just remind everyone of the various ways in which there can be some real disparities in the opportunities that are made available to students, either depending on the school they attend or even within the school. And just reminding folks, and I did want to also mention that in one of the in-person trainings we conducted, we heard about, we have already talked a little bit about Janesville and the issue with being able to take textbooks home, but we also heard from another district where the dress code policy they realized was unfair, and it was disproportionately directed at students of color who wore their hair a certain way or wore particular colors or a type of clothing, and they often were disciplined for that. And the question to the district was, well, so what was the revision to that policy? And they said, well, basically it came down to you must wear clothes. You must cover your private parts, and that was about the extent of it. But again, they realized that they had put in place a number of rules and regulations that worked against certain groups of students, and that those students were disproportionately disciplined either by suspension or I don't know if expulsion ever occurred, but their opportunity to attend school was compromised.
We have a couple of links in the chat for folks to take a look at. Right.
And I can also share the results.
Plan. Thank you. All right, go for it, Alicia.
Yeah, so I think it might be easy just to talk through. So for next week, it looks like some districts have work in progress that they're looking forward to moving some strategies forward, and feel free to add in the chat box if you would like to elaborate. Another district wrote that we're going to work on becoming data informed within the next week and understanding the demographics. For 6 weeks, talking to the administration about targeting families and I guess bringing families into the district and engaging them. Another district wrote expanding personal knowledge and understanding of race issues. Another person said that later this summer, we'll get student achievement and discipline data broken out by district demographics and schools and see if we're meeting or missing stated goals for the year. And in the longer term, so 6 months, there's someone who said, know what it would take to have a place for medical and counseling in the schools. So again, this is another way to engage families who may not come into schools or may need other supports that go beyond sort of what we traditionally think of schools providing. Talking to and educating stakeholders in the district and community, sharing the district equity plan with the mayor and city council. And I guess this district also launched a citywide equity and diversity commission. So I think, continuing that strategy. And then finally, in 1 year, investing in moving counseling and healthcare into schools, making sure we are in constant contact with minority families and asking them for feedback. Another person wrote using equity lens to implement policy. And another person wrote recruiting more diverse staff.
So unless folks have other things they'd like to share, we're going to wrap up the webinar. I did want to throw out there, if anyone has a question that they were hoping this webinar could answer, by all means, mention it in the chat box. We'll hang on for a few more minutes, but or if there's information that you would like, we could certainly try and respond to those sorts of questions. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any any questions, pop up in the chat box. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us, and you'll see in the chat box that there's a quick 5-minute feedback survey that we're hoping you can complete once we end the webinar. Also, there will be a recording of the webinar available at this website. And we just wanted to thank you for joining us. Again, I'm Leslie Anderson, Dan Elajim, Janine Hildreth, and Alicia Butler were our presenters this afternoon. And I also wanted to just make sure you knew about the references that were used to put this training together, but also these are available, and we would urge you to take advantage of some of these resources. So thank you very much for joining.